Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here, a number of guests as well. We begin, as always, with a short prayer. Direct, we beseech thee, O Lord, all our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every prayer and work of ours may begin always from thee, and by thee be happily ended. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
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 Today we're delighted to host three of the California Four: Desmond Silveira, Brian Carroll, and Ed Rushman. We hope that later Kevin Egger will be able to join us. Each of these gentlemen has ties with the American Solidarity Party. As our listeners know, every week we've been discussing the projects and promise of the Solidarity Party. Each of our shows is available as a free podcast. Just check in with us at the Open Door Facebook page. Our program today centers around two questions. First, what's been the most challenging in your campaigns? And second, what can we learn from your campaigns as the American Solidarity Party continues to grow? Counting on John Breen and Jack Cork to steer the pot, let's start. Desmond Silveira, will you be our first respondent? What's
Sure.
been most challenging so far, and what can we learn from your challenges?
So for me, I guess that the toughest thing about running for public office has been that the system seems to have been built for a two-party system, and there are many forces that seem to make it more difficult for a third party to run. And I expected that going in, but I guess I didn't realize to what extent that was the case. Even though I had been involved in our party's 2016 presidential campaign, I was the campaign manager for Mike Maturin. Me running as governor, I've had the opportunity to be in one of the gubernatorial debates. It was a smaller one, only the minor candidates showed up. But in trying to get endorsements from pro-life organizations in trying to get onto the polls, just as an option for people to indicate their preference for me and for me to get any kind of media attention, it's been a huge uphill battle because the media, the debate organizers, and the pollsters are very resistant to putting anyone on there other than the two-party candidates.
Desmond?
Yes.
How about to keep things balanced? Instead of going on to the second question, let's have folks that are with us. I'm thinking especially of John and Jack. Ask something about what you've just said now. And then when people have had a chance to, I guess I call it, stir the pot on this first response of yours, then we can go to your second. And then we can continue that same process when we turn to Brian and Ed. Would that work?
Yes.
Okay, so John Breen and Jack Quirk, what say ye?
Well, that depends on whether you're talking to John or Jack.
Go ahead, Jack.
All right, then I want to jump in on this two-party preference that we have in many states. It takes more signatures to get on the ballot than if you're a third party or if you're an independent candidate. And what specific things have gotten in the way in terms of your running for governor in the state of California, Desmond?
Well, there were the obvious things like the high costs for filing and both in terms of money and the number of signatures, but that was to be expected. I guess what I'm referring to more, that the part that was more surprising was stuff like when I'm the best candidate in a particular way, whether it be the best candidate in terms of supporting school choice or the most pro-life candidate or other aspects that are particular to our party, it's still difficult for me to get an endorsement from organizations that support those issues because they rather offer the endorsement to the Republican candidate, even if the Republican candidate is much less supportive of the issue and not really particularly electable. I mean, the likelihood is that the Democrats are going to do well in this election. I don't want to jinx anything, so I'm not going to speak in absolutes, but I don't think that the Republicans have a great chance of coming away with a whole lot of votes.
But isn't that the nature of the system, though, when you have the type of system that we have where a plurality candidate will ultimately win, that this sort of thing is going to devolve into a two-party system? And isn't that really the safest bet for somebody to either go with the Democrats or the Republicans and get the candidate that's closest to their interest?
Well, the way I see it is if that candidate had a good chance of winning, then absolutely, you want to go with someone that's electable. But when the candidate has virtually no chance of winning, then I personally think, now maybe they think differently, but I personally think that it's better to go with the candidate to support the candidate that pushes the value that you're promoting the most. So it's more about the issue than about the candidate.
But there's really nothing to be done about it, is there, except try and change hearts and minds? You can't make a law, obviously, that says that third-party candidates get so many endorsements. It has to be something whereby the public is educated to do something like that. Am I right?
That's correct, yes.
Well, okay, John Breen, you want to jump in here?
Sure. Mr. Silveira, you mentioned something about the pro-life movement, how they may not be so quick to endorse a candidate who's who's obviously pro-life as yourself, and they may prefer to go with someone who may be less pro-life but more have a likely chance of winning. I think it's a reflection of a problem that we're seeing in the nation regarding the pro-life movement, where the pro-life movement is becoming somewhat fragmented or somewhat divided, and that is that they're willing to compromise on a few issues in order to get a candidate who would most likely would not have the most damage. I mean, the person who would be the least likely to further the abortion agenda, but would also get into office. So, and in so doing, they compromise on a few issues where they would endorse a candidate who's pro-life, but given the caveats, that he's against abortion except in certain cases like rape, incest, or the danger of the life of the mother. But what pro-life groups are missing, though, this is my opinion, is that if you endorse a candidate who's pro-life, but, and given the popular caveats, that person's really not pro-life. If you're against abortion, then you have to be against it 100%. And regardless of the situation, and it's a hard argument to further. I've come across this in some of my coworkers where they believe that abortion is licit given the caveats, and that's just not wrong. It's not pro-life. So I think it's a trickling down effect where pro-life groups are kind of working like political parties in of themselves, where they're trying to be cagey about who they endorse, but still further their own agenda. So that's kind of my thoughts on the matter.
I agree entirely, 100%. But I guess what I take issue with isn't that they are strategically choosing an endorsement. That's what they should do. That's a given. They need to strategically choose someone that's going to advance the agenda in the most effective way, even if that person isn't going to necessarily win the public office. But it seems to me that the issue I take with it is that even when the major party candidate has no chance of winning, they will still go with that candidate, even though he doesn't really make the pro-life issue a centerpiece of his campaign, and will pass up the third party who focuses everything onto the pro-life issue. That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. I think it's more so that some of the pro-life organizations are just too slanted in favor of the Republicans.
Let me, Desmond and John, let me intervene here a little bit and change the order of things. I know I just changed it once, but why not change it again? Ed Rushman, I think, has made a good suggestion. Why not do the first question as we've just done it and have Desmond respond to that, and then go ahead and have Brian respond to that first question and have people jump in to discuss his response, and then go on to Ed, same format. And then we'll take that second question over again, starting with Desmond response, and then going to Brian with the response, and then going to Ed with the response. Okay?
Sounds good.
So that means that we're going to ask Brian Carroll that same question number one. What's been most challenging in your campaign?
I'll come back to the endorsements thing that Desmond mentioned, but I'll start with some nitty-gritty things. It was hard just getting a bank account set up at the beginning. I started in December to set up a bank account for the campaign, and the first two banks that I went into wanted me to file the whole fictitious business route, and I thought that can't be right. And finally, the third bank knew how to do it. The first two banks, even they were big banks, national banks, and they didn't have a person in the bank that knew how to set up an account like that. And then I tried a local bank, and they did, but the paperwork that was required, and because I'm I'm still working full time, teaching full day, try and get to the bank before it closes after work. It took me a full 6 weeks to actually get the bank account all the way set up. So there's some nitty gritty things like that that were a lot more challenging than I expected. On the endorsements, I think I understood ahead of time that I was not going to get many endorsements. I did go and I sat down with the local Right to Life organization, and I have cultivated some friendships there. But realistically, these are people that survive on donations, and their donor base is Republican. They can't afford to offend their donor base by going with an unknown like me. And then I also went to my union. As a teacher, I belong to the California Teachers Association. And I went through the interview process with them. And again, I was going through the motions, but I knew that both the state and the national organizations will insist that they would endorse a Democrat. So it's from both sides. There was no way I was going to get the endorsement, but I went through the motions. It was fun. It was interesting to actually go through the process and see it work. Other than that, I think the biggest challenge has been I thought that I would have a lot of literature printed up, and I just ran out of time and did not have time to put it together. And if I had put it together, I would not have had the money to print it off. So I have gone mostly with Facebook posts that I could boost. I think that's probably been my most effective campaign method.
Well, then, how about John and Jack, again, posing some questions for your first response?
All right, then I'll jump in, and I'll ask the question of, you've got one group of people that are going to be Republican, and you've got another group of people that are going to be Democrat. It's possible that, obviously, as a candidate of the American Solidarity Party, your views are going to be viewed as eclectic. Why did you choose to run on a third party as opposed to running on one of the major party tickets? It seems like your chances have been, for ultimate election, have been reduced by that choice.
Well, yeah, and it's complicated because one of the reasons we're running in the first place is try and advertise the party. And so that means running as a member of the party. But the state of California won't list us by our party on the ballot unless we are in the vicinity of 60,000 members statewide. There were 11 parties that tried to reach that threshold this year in California and couldn't. And so we get called no party preference, which might actually help me. The no party preference registration in this district is like 22%. And I noticed somebody was able to post what's come in so far in the mail-in ballots, and of the ballots that have been mailed in, 11% are from the no party preference. Well, that's far better than what I could hope to get from the American Solidarity Party, because we've probably only got 8 or 10 members in the district. So I may benefit from the fact that the state wouldn't allow me to put American Solidarity Party on the ballot.
All right. Well, that's interesting. Now let's take, but you will be in the general election based on what you said. Is that correct? I suppose in California the top 2 vote getters run in the general election, and so the primary is you vote for whoever you want, regardless of party. Am I correct?
Correct. And the primary is next Tuesday, and I strongly suspect that will be the end of the line for me. There are 5 or 6 candidates in my race. There's the incumbent, and there are 3 Democrats. Eunice has never dipped below 60% in any election, and he's been reelected like 8 times. And I suspect we're going to make that a lot closer than it's ever been in the past, but he will probably still finish in first. Then there's the 3 Democrats that will be splitting about 35% of the vote. and then there's a libertarian who starts with 3% of the vote or 3% registration, and then there's me. If I could get even most of the no party preference, I would be amazed. I would actually finish in the pack with the rest of them.
Well, I've been interested in the impact of the internet on elections and how that's going to impact the necessity for funding. Obviously, you can't buy TV time and can't hand out literature, as you said. But here's this free source, or almost free source, through Facebook and what have you. And has that had any impact on your ability to reach people? And how do you think that's going to work out in the future for candidates? Is the internet going to overtake the television and print ads for candidates, do you think?
That's going to be really interesting. Today in my mailbox, U.S. Postal Service, the leading Democrat had 2 pieces of mail, both glossy, expensive things. As I understand it, each one of those probably cost him $1 to put in my mailbox. So that's $2 that he's spending on me. I don't know what the figure was for the last election, but the election before that, Nunes, the incumbent, spent $16 for every vote that he got. There's no way that a third party can compete with that. But with the internet, my most successful post fairly early on, when President Trump said some things about African countries, I simply posted a picture of me with my oncologist, who is from Nigeria, and said that I just thanked him for me being cancer-free for 7 years, and hundreds of people liked that. Many of them shared it. I managed to have my picture next to a very popular and well-loved man, and that was more effective than anything I could have done with I think boosting the post. I might have spent $30 or $40. So it was an amazing result for a very small investment. You can't always get that lucky, but that one worked really well for me.
That spoke volumes. That spoke volumes. Jack, we better turn to John, because
I was just going to say that. It's time for him to do that. Go ahead.
We haven't even begun with Ed, who's waiting in the wings. So, John, what do you have to say in response to what Brian has shared?
This is a kind of a question that I posed to Mr. Rushman a couple months ago, and I'm still kind of on the subject of endorsements, getting your name out there. But have you reached out to the police and fire, in your district? Because it's kind of the case in my city. I'm in a suburb of Chicago, but in local politics, it's usually the people who have the endorsement of the local workers, like the city workers, police, fire, street workers, things like that. Endorsements of that sort from their unions, they typically get in. Have you been able to secure relations with those people?
I have not made an attempt on that. As a full-time teacher with limited campaign time, I went with the connections that I thought would be the most promising with the time I had, and I don't have any connections in either police or fire, and I suspect that those groups may already be committed to the incumbent, and they can't afford to offend an incumbent on a long shot like me, because they're going to go to him if he's elected. They're going to want to go to him and ask for things, and they can't have offended him.
That's a hard thing to deal with. Now, Ed, what would you tell us about the challenges, the most difficult challenges that you've been facing?
I think that the endorsement remark there about the problems of offending incumbents or offending somebody that might become in office was something that I had thought about. But a few things. Early on, one of the folks that I know had a son returning for the Christmas break, actually, and he was a political science major, and he was very interested in interning. He was very interested in helping with the campaign. He really liked what I was saying, liked everything, and that was great. And his mother took him aside and said, if you help an independent, it will end your career because the Democrats will never want you after this. His mother is a Democrat. She's very, very strongly pro-abortion. And you absolutely cannot be associated with somebody like this because it will destroy your future. So he declined to help. I think that says a great deal. We do have the problem that the endorsers, not just the endorsers, like fire department and police, but the media, if the media give attention, then they risk losing access because for almost everybody, it's about having access to power. That's what people are really, especially groups, are really after. Unions, the media, businesses, every possible thing, every possible organization has a Democratic or a Republican affiliation. And the ones that don't risk their neutrality if they endorse or help. Because I had some that really try to be party independent, and they said, we can't endorse you because, we just don't endorse. That's the only way we've played it. We don't want to do Democrat or Republican, so we just don't endorse anybody. I think the other challenge that I see is staying positive. This is a hard battle. And I know that some are running to popularize certain views or to promote the American Solidarity Party, and that's great. I am running to win. I'm not going to say that I'll play dirty, but I have played a little rough sometimes, and I haven't hesitated to call things out that the incumbent does that are public that I think are wrong. But I do think it's been really, really hard at times. And what I've done to get around that is when I get discouraged is I go and talk to people, hand out some flyers, tell people what I'm trying to do, and I find everybody's encouraging. So that's I've gone through this little emotional roller coaster somewhat, but the people are the ones that keep me going. I think that we can't expect to do something like this and have it go according to the same way the other two parties do it. They have had a very long time working the levers of power. They have access. Everybody wants to kiss up to them. We just can't play it the same way, being independents or being in a party that's trying to start out. I think that I had a greater expectation that the internet would help. I knew that it was heavily filtered Democratic, but I didn't know how bad it really was. I completely stopped buying ads on Facebook at some point because I could tell that they were shunting my hits actually out of the country. So I was only getting responses from China, even though my ad was targeting a particular city. I would get practically no response from that city, but I would get tons of responses from China. And I think I suspect that's because their system is set up for very large numbers of hits, and they can hide that kind of thing when there's a lot of hits. They don't expect anybody that's doing ads to go back and look at every single contact. I have friends that are getting taken off of Twitter, that are getting blocked in all sorts of ways. And, we do have to remember that everything right now is extremely biased. It's legal. There's no expectation of neutrality with Twitter or Google or any of them. Oddly enough, by the way, they contribute to both parties in some cases evenly. But in their actual filtering of information, they tend to filter out anything that doesn't fit the Democratic Party line. So I think those have been the most challenging things. I'm up for questions as well.
Why don't we begin with John Breen, and then we'll switch over to Jack Quirk. John?
It's kind of interesting how you mentioned that the forces of technology, if you will, so Facebook, Google, or Twitter, that they're being pretty much. I think it's easy to say blatantly biased one way or the other. And it's interesting how recently Facebook's founder Mark Zuckerberg had to appear in testimony before a panel of Congress and senators. And I think at the moment he's in Europe, basically explaining the issues with Facebook and their scandals and whatnot. So, and I think at this point it's the government is looking into exploring the realms of the internet and seeing what they can actually control and what they can't. So, just even though we're talking primarily political reasons here, as far as political neutrality, it's a really broad topic because the government is now trying to figure out how they're going to regulate a force that's kind of unknown, that it's almost hardly regulated, and that's the internet. So they're just trying to figure out what goes and what can happen and how they can control. So it's all an interesting topic and all that, but it's just interesting. We're living in a very interesting time, and it'll be interesting to see how the government comes out and how they're going to, utilize and regulate this new force that's out there called the internet.
That's something that the American Solidarity Party will be visiting, I'm sure, and working on its platform. Jack, take us ahead.
Well, let me be the fly in the ointment or the devil's advocate or something like that, and ask Mr. Rushman the following question. The real politic being what it is and what you described, just sitting on the sidelines and looking at these things, I see a Republican Party that is basically a dumpster fire. It's there's to the point where they're separating kids from their parents for crossing the border. They're withdrawing from international agreements pertaining to the environment. They're withdrawing from the agreement from Iran, and they're doing a number of things that are, if they are thought about, can't be popular with too many people. And so I'm wondering why the people that make up the American Solidarity Party don't invade the Republicans. So if they implode, they'll be the new Republican Party.
Yeah, I think that it's a lot harder to do that than it might appear. I think that between the two parties, I do think the Republican Party is the one that's more likely to change for the better. They have been a little bit the keystone cops of politics for quite some time now. They suffer from a major lack of leadership and direction. And I think that's the reason why they wander on foreign policy now, which used to be their strong point. But aside from all that, the problem is everybody is still used to party mechanisms. And as long as we play by those rules, anybody, and I think we've seen that observing the American Solidarity Party, the desire to play it like the political parties means that we just end up with the same thing again. There's a quote I really like from a Franco Zeffirelli movie that some of you may know. And the quote is, "People must change before nations do." And I think people must change before parties do. And right now, what we would have to do is have a very, very clear vision. We would have to express things in a strong, fresh way that would be so compelling that everybody would just have to go with it. And when I say everybody, I mean a significant number to move a party in a direction. But right now, money is so much a part of everything, and the ability to attract donations. I think one of the things that's been a challenge for me, or challenge for America, is that when money drives everything, then anything that's important that doesn't make money for someone simply won't be addressed, or at least not in a productive way. Only the things that have a very, very clear and substantial financial payoff for somebody will get pushed. I think that's the reason why the DREAM Act has gone nowhere. No one makes money on the DREAM Act, and any number of other things. I mean, the Democrats have said for decades that they're against the death penalty. We had a Democratic president for 8 years who did not commute the sentences of all of the federal death penalty prisoners.
Well, let me give you an example of somebody who could be making money off of what I understand to be the message of the American Solidarity Party, and that's labor. Right now, they don't have a party at all. I mean, the Democrats are ostensibly their party, but a lot of their membership ends up voting Republican because, well, Donald Trump comes along and promises to raise tariffs and so forth. Of course, it's not going to end up working out for him, but why not that have be your people that are going to make some money off of you, to put it crassly.
But of course, we're talking about the labor leaders that make the money. It's not so much the workers necessarily. And the problem is that once you start to play the money game, then you're not really it's not really a fresh approach anymore. At that point, it's just business as usual, and it's just another one that's, basically pay to play. And I think that's fundamental. That's a fundamental problem in American politics right now. It needs to be, we're doing things, somebody needs to stand up and propose something that is so good that people want to follow it. Whether or not you like Ronald Reagan, one of the things about him was he exuded a kind of optimism, and people did respond to that. Whether or not you like the policies, it's exhibiting a kind of optimism and a positivity actually makes a difference, and I think that's where a lot of the hope has to be, rather than trying to doing the same broken system over and over again isn't going to cut it.
The party needs to put forward service as the goal, not power, and the party needs to speak of generosity as opposed to greed and accumulation. And we're going to have to find the voices to articulate both of those shifts. Now, we're past the halfway mark, well past it, and we've got a second question. And let's go back to Desmond Silveira. Desmond, what can we learn from your campaign as the American Solidarity Party continues to grow?
So, people in California are discontent with the two-party duopoly. It's been that's been the case for some time, and the issues, the feelings in that regard are growing, and that's why we went to the top two jungle primary. That's, in my opinion, that's a good step forward, but it doesn't. It's just a step. I think the next step is to implement alternative voting systems, and there's been a lot of forward momentum in that regard. San Francisco implements ranked choice voting. I believe Santa Clara is moving in that direction as well. And so one of the things that I'm engaging in is I am building a type of alliance with other third parties and independents. I've reached out to the Libertarians and the Green Party, and I've reached out to various voting organizations, voting reform organizations like Fair Vote and the Center for Election Science and rangevoting.org and Free and Fair Elections. And the idea is to do some demographic research to find out where might be the next best places to push alternative voting and make some progress so that future elections aren't as monopolized. Now that that's in regard to future elections. But just for our own party, the American Solidarity Party, I think having gone through this process, next time, whether it's whoever are going to be the next candidates, I think we as a party are much better prepared to support those candidates, know the ropes, and know how to get funding, how to approach media and push for advertising, marketing, simple things like filing paperwork, and like Brian was saying, just getting a bank account. That was a huge pain for me as well. With all the little things that we've learned about that, I think we're in a much better position moving forward.
All right, some real particulars there. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to make a third shift here in format. Let's save the questions that we have, and we surely do have them, on this part of our discussion until both Brian and Ed have had a chance to express themselves. So, Brian, what can we learn from your campaign as the party continues to grow?
Well, since we started with really no party at all in this area, I think the campaign itself has produced some major steps forward. Every time that someone liked one of my posts, I invited that person to like my page. And so now I have, I don't know, maybe 200 people who have taken that second step, and I can start recruiting a party committee out of that group of people.
Excellent.
That's a major thing. Secondly, I have established a good relationship with each of the other challengers, not the incumbent, but the other challengers. I think we have become friends. And so if one of those happens to get elected, then suddenly I have a connection in Washington that respects me, and I can go to that person with requests. And then I think I've made other connections. There, for instance, in one of the campaigns, there was a campaign worker that was dedicated to this other candidate, but I'm suspicious that this particular person would be more comfortable in the Solidarity Party because she is pro-life and the candidate she was supporting is not. So as soon as the campaign is over, I won't feel guilty about recruiting her. And just those kinds of things that may be difficult to measure. This morning, a candidate, he's not even in my race, he's running for state senate, but he wrote he's endorsed a different candidate in my race, but he still wrote a really nice plug for me and posted it on his page. And so I have shared that around some places. You know, those kind of connections are really valuable. And I hope to take advantage of those in the near future.
Constructive and creative. Very good. So we have Ed then. Lessons to take away.
Well, I think, as I said before, I think having a strong, fresh, clear message, being really different, not doing politics as usual. People really responded. I went door to door, not a lot, but I went door to door, and it was amazing that everybody was so happy. But the problem is there's no way to reach everybody without volunteers, and it was hard to get that. What I'd like to point out is something a little different. You know, they talk about starting at a lower level, you know, that we should be doing local offices, and the House was too much at the beginning. But I think that's overly simplistic. One of the reasons that I ran and something that I think we should look for, is because the particular situation in this district, in this race, was really good for us. It's dominated by the Democrats, and it doesn't matter that it's the Democrats, but one party gets 3 times the votes of the other. And when you have that situation, along with a number of independents and a top 2 primary, it becomes more reasonable to be able to edge out whichever party is the minority party. So in this case, the Democrats will get 3/4 of the vote in many of the situations. The Republicans have a hard time getting much more than 1/4. So that means that given that there's a 1/4 independent here already, I have a little better chance of edging out the Republican. But another factor, I guess what I'm thinking here is to look at the 435 districts and figure out which ones fit this kind of a thing and then identify people to run. The other thing is, I had the unique situation that the California endorsed Republican was pro-abortion. That gave me a little bit of an ability, we'll see how it works out Tuesday, to campaign against him on that and reach out to pro-life voters so that I can edge him out in the primary. Now, we're going to find out whether Republican voters will find it more important to vote Republican than to vote pro-life. And I'm sorry to say, I probably won't be surprised if it turns out that they actually will pick a pro-abortion Republican over a pro-life independent. And it will not surprise me. But that's kind of the situation. So I guess my point is that I have found that this was a unique situation. This is where I live. I didn't choose this district based on this situation, but that's what really caused me to run, was that I really did feel that there was a chance of at least getting to the general. And we'll find out if I'm right when Tuesday comes around.
Well, all politics is local, or so they say. And you've pointed out a specific structure in your district that's well worth noting. Jack Quirk, you want to jump in now? You could say something to one of the candidates in particular or raise a general point?
Well, and I want to make sure my speaker is on. Mr. Rushman, is that probably the best strategy going forward to look for districts where one of the major parties is particularly weak?
Yes, if it's a top 2 primary.
Yeah,
if it's not,
yeah. Go ahead. I was just wondering how many there were, but yeah, go ahead.
If it's not top 2, then it's going to be the traditional thing. And frankly, I don't know all the details of that, but from what I've heard, it's really hard for independents when it's not that way. A top 2 primary right now in California is being used to push out the Republicans and to have only 2 Democrats running in the general. That's the strategy for Democrats. But in a House race, they won't risk that. So they will back the incumbent when there's an incumbent that's Democrat. They will back the incumbent and have no challengers. So that's where the opening is. I didn't say that in the other part. But yeah, it has to be a top 2 primary for that strategy to work. So if I had the time, what I would do is I would take 435 districts, analyze the differential between the winning party and the losing party, look for a high ratio, and then filter it down by the way, data analytics is part of my shtick. That's what I do for a living. And then also make sure that they're top 2 and look maybe possibly for the Republican, if the Republican is in the minority party, that they're pro-abortion. That would be, and then if you filtered it down and you found 20 or 30 of those in the country, those would be the ones that would be worth hitting hard.
I see that we're got about 10 minutes left, and I wonder if there's a quick way to answer this particular question, and that is, but I would like all of you to respond to the following statement, and that is that based on the fact that it's people wanting to get access to power, that's what elections are about, that's what endorsements are about, and noting that the Democrats and the Republicans, they change all the time. I mean, I can remember when the Democrats were the segregationist party. And then you take third parties, they have a tendency to be ideological. Are third party ideological parties doomed to always consist of minorities, and the major parties that represent more or less economic interests, are they going to carry the day because of that? I'll start with Mr. Silveira.
I think that so I think in the short term, third parties are likely to stay highly ideological and small due to that ideology. But I think in the longer term, that's going to change. I think that so I'm if it's not clear, I'm very big on voting reform, and I think that as voting reform is adopted, it'll give people more incentive to break away from the major parties.
Okay, Mr. Carroll, what do you think?
Well, I think every single district is different and every single election is different. And so there will always be exceptions to the rules. And we are most likely to be successful someplace that was an exception. In this particular year, I started the campaign with the distinct possibility that my candidate could be charged in Mueller's investigation. And if he had to drop out, suddenly I would have been the no party preference. There would have been a Libertarian and 3 Democrats. And the majority Republican Party would have had to find somebody to vote for. And I could have gotten a major number of those.
Fascinating.
It didn't turn out that way, but it was a distinct possibility. And when I was trying to decide my basic game plan, I wrote that in as a possibility. And if it had happened, I would have stood a pretty good chance of being in the top 2. So you don't come up with that kind of thing every time, though. That's an exception. It's a local situation, and it's specific to this year. And we are most likely to be successful in a situation like that.
What about you, Mr. Rushman?
Well, I'm going to be the difficult one and challenge the idea of it being about power. I think that for somebody to be successful that's not in the 2 main parties, that they absolutely have to come forward as desiring to be of service, not desiring to grab power. And secondly, I am definitely not a fan of ideologies. I think we can have opinions about things, but as the monk Thomas Merton said, an ideology is a rule made automatic. And in times like this, I don't think we can afford to be automatic and just do knee-jerk responses. We've really, really got to do some serious thinking, and we need to demonstrate that we can do that. If we can't demonstrate it, then a third party or independents will never get anywhere.
Here comes the clock watcher, and I'm interested in what John Breen has to say.
Mr. Rushman, you mentioned earlier about the difference between choosing either to start from the bottom with local elections and work your way up, as opposed to starting with Congress, and that's a kind of a question. It's a concept that I've been kind of throwing around in my head. The difference between the two, and the metaphor. The grassroots. The grassroots metaphor seems to work with it, but I'm starting to wonder if the political / cultural shift is changing towards it kind of works almost like a figure 8, where you shoot for the upper office, get the popularity, get your name out there, but then be willing to lose that election so that you can eventually slope down and going into the local election to possibly work your way up. That's just a concept that I thought of as I was listening. Do you see this kind of a metaphor working?
I think for me, I just want to reinforce, I really see it as a matter of doing the data analytics, looking at the things that are winnable by looking at demographics, looking at trends, looking at all the data. It's really going after anything that can be won by somebody that comes along with an attitude of service that comes through straightforward, because that's what people are looking for. They're looking for authenticity and service, and they're not finding it. They almost don't even know that they can even ask for it right now. But there's a lot of discontent. But it's got to be, the hard work of data analytics has to be done to understand where to push, where we can win, or at least where we can make a really, really good showing, regardless of the level, although that's never going to happen at the senator level or president or governor. At the governor, the objective can be to get a message out and to get people familiar, but you're not going to win it. If you're after winning, it's got to be done with the hard work of analytics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say so.
Let me take the last, 4 minutes to tell a story and say a prayer. The story comes from Irving Howe, longtime editor of the magazine journal Dissent. Howe tells the story of a shtetl, a very isolated shtetl, somewhere in Central Europe, a Jewish village. And there's something to be said for the isolation, and that's that the Cossacks don't know where you are, so you're less likely to be killed. On the other hand, some of the village elders were worried that the Messiah would come, and the shtetl would miss out on it altogether. So they got together some young fellas, and they said, we want you to wait at the very outskirts of the village, and then you let us know if there's any mention of a Messiah's coming. And we'll give you each some food. We'll have some food brought out to you, and you'll get a shekel a month. I guess in those days a shekel was worth quite a bit. Well, months passed, years passed, more years passed, and the young fellows weren't that young, and they came back to the village elders, and they said, the pay is low. Pay is way too low. And the elders gathered together, and after some discussion among themselves, they came back and they said to the no longer young fellows, you're right, the pay is low, but the work is steady. And why did I tell that story? I think with the American Solidarity Party, there's no pay at all. And the work is very, very steady because we have to change the culture as well as change the whole political structure. And that takes patience. And patience in the face of power, well, that's about as difficult as anything can be. Now, today happens to be the Feast of the Visitation. Mary visits Elizabeth. And as the visit develops, Mary says this, and I'm reading from the Gospel according to Luke. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has looked with favor on his lowly servant. From this day, all generations will call me blessed. The Almighty has done great things for me, and holy is his name. He has mercy on those who fear him in every generation. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud in their conceit. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has lifted up the lowly. He has filled with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. He has come to the help of his servant Israel, for he has remembered his promise of mercy, the promise he made to our fathers, to Abraham and his children forever. A great many of us in the American Solidarity Party live in that promise and hope for that promise to be fulfilled. And, well, this patience, that word in English comes from the Latin word, the verb patior. And its first meaning is, I suffer. I suffer. There's a kind of suffering built into patience, and we're experiencing it, and our hope is not going to be darkened by it. We're going ahead. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Gentlemen, thank you very much, and good night.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.